Hi, welcome to Painting Lessons Online. I'm Jessica, and today we're going to do something really special. We're going to create a Monet reproduction. This is an oil painting, and it's for all levels. Beginners, advanced, intermediate, everyone is welcome to learn how to make this beautiful masterpiece with me today. To begin our painting, we need a canvas, palette, our paints. I'm going to be using black, white, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, viridian green, permanent green, yellow, and alizarin crimson. I've got a rag, some paint thinner, my paint brushes, some gloves, and some palette knives. You don't need these, but I find that they're useful for mixing the colors. So if you have one, grab them. And lastly, pencil and eraser. We're going to start by sketching our composition. What's great about a Monet water lily scene is there's a lot of freedom. We can really create whatever composition we want, and it's more about the colors, which is my favorite part of painting, so I'm really excited to do this with you today. When we're doing the lily pads over here up the top, these are farther away, so that we want them to be more of a elongated oval shape. So I'm going to draw this group of lily pads, long and oval, where the edges taper like this. This one is the same. We've got one coming off from the edge. This is like two groups of lily pads that are combined. We have some lily pads coming off of this side and some more in the distance. Now, as we get further down on the canvas, we're getting closer to the viewer. So the lily pads are not going to be as squished. They're going to have a little bit more space in the center. So over here, it's got like two groups of lilies that kind of have an interesting shape. And then here in the center, bottom right-hand corner, we have the big group of lily pads. And one last group in the corner with a few lilies up there. Okay, and then I think we got one over here. So this is just to guide us on where we're going to put the water versus the lilies. So now we can start mixing some color. Go ahead and put on your gloves. Make sure you're in a well-ventilated area. I've got all of my windows and doors open right now so that I get some fresh air when working with oil paints. And I'm going to start by painting the water. So the water in this piece is kind of like a neutral gray and a pinkish pastel color. I like both, but I'm really in love with all of his like pastel colors. So instead of the neutral gray, I think I'm going to use a pastel blue and keep the pastel pink, and so that I get both. So let's start with the pastel blue, the shadows. I'm going to take some ultramarine blue. You don't need very much because when you're creating a pastel color, it's mostly white, and so just a little bit will be fine. I'll take a little bit of cobalt. And I'll take a little alizarin crimson, so when we get to the other water we can do that too. And then we're going to need a ton of white. I'm going to make a few piles so that I can take from either one depending on what color I need. Alrighty, so I'm going to move these down so we've got some space. I'm going to use my palette knife. If you don't have a palette knife, you can use your brush, that's no problem. And I'm going to mix the pastel blue. So I'm going to take a lot of white, nice big chunk, and just the tiniest bit of ultramarine blue, like really almost nothing. and mix it together. Okay, that's made a super light blue, almost white. Now I'm gonna add some of the cobalt blue. Again, just a small amount. Okay. Okay, so we've got a really nice blue. As you can see, I'm putting pressure on the paint. I'm squishing it down to massage it so that the colors get really well mixed, and also the paint warms up a little bit and is not so stiff when we're painting on the canvas. Alright, so I've got a nice light blue. I think I'm going to make a slightly darker version of this. So I'm going to take some more white, add more cobalt and ultramarine. I took more this time of each. And now we have a more vibrant blue. I think that's going to be a nice complement for the shadows. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and mix the pinks for the water as well. I'm going to use a different palette knife so that I don't have to clean the first one. Take some white, very small amount of alizarin crimson, mix those together. Okay, that's a very pretty color. I think I want an even more pastel pink, so I'm going to take some more white and just use the pink that's already on my palette knife to mix it into there. So that's very, very light. Okay, great. And I think I want to make a kind of purple color as well. So I'm going to take some white, the tiniest bit of alizarin crimson, and the tiniest bit of ultramarine blue. And get some light purples. So this is a super light, very warm purple. I think that I want to have a cooler one as well, so I'm going to take some white, more ultramarine this time, and just a little bit of alizarin crimson. Now I have a more blue-purple color. Okay. So now I want to take a medium-sized brush, maybe something like this one, about this size. And I'm going to start by blocking in the shadow areas. So in our image, you can see the shadows are up at the top, and then they kind of bleed down. It looks like it's the reflection of the trees that are creating the shadows. So I'm going to start with our dark blue for those areas, and I'm just going to fill it in. Right around the lily pads. And you don't have to worry about covering your lily pads, that's okay. We're actually going to add blue to those areas later anyways. And I'm not going to fill the whole area. I'm actually going to leave some areas for the lighter blue so that we've got some variation in the water. It doesn't really matter which areas. We just want a majority of the blue to be at the top. Okay, and so let's see. We've got the blue, it comes down here. It's okay if you leave texture. Texture's great. Monet used a lot of texture in his paintings. Okay, and then he's got this shadow that kind of comes down like this on one of the trees. Alright, so that area. And then we've got another little shadow here. And there's a tree coming down on this side that doesn't go all the way down, kind of like that shape. So I've ran out of paint. Let's make some more. Take the white and all of the ultramarine and blue that I have left. Okay. So I'm just gonna fill in nice and loose, fun brush strokes, nice and thick, lots of paint. Kind of get close to those lily pads, maybe cover some of my pencil lines. So I made some dark pencil lines so that you guys could see. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I'm gonna go in with my brush still full of the dark. It's no problem. I'm gonna get the light blue as well. And now I'm gonna try to fill in those gaps that I left in the shadows. Nice and thick. Kind of letting the colors blend a little bit, but not trying to mix them together too much. Just letting them sit on top of each other. I'm letting it be really thick. It's looking pretty already. Okay, I'm going to go back to my dark blue and maybe fill in some areas. I think I'm going to try to cover my pencil lines. So I'm going to go back in and cover what I drew a little bit. I'm doing brush strokes left to right. But you can really do whatever kind of brushstroke you want. Maybe, you know, repeat the same brushstroke throughout, but it's okay if you mix it up. That's no problem. In Monet's piece, it looks like he's going all directions, so it's quite all right. Okay. Just making sure I don't have any white left on the canvas. In those shadow areas. Okay. Oh, forgot over here. Beautiful. All right, look at that color. Isn't that nice? Okay, now I'm going to do the pink. So I'm going to switch to a new brush. And I'm going to start with the light pinks first at the top and then get darker as I go down. So I got my light pink up here. I'm going to try not to touch the blue at first. It's okay if you do, but just start by kind of getting around the blue to begin with. Have some light blue on this side where the shadow ends. Okay, so I'm not blending with the blue at all. I'm not even touching the blue yet. Now I'm going to use the darker red. Go down a little bit. And I'm keeping the brush strokes really thick and loose. You can blend the pink into the other pink a little bit. Go back to the light pink, add some more sections with light pink. Okay, and let's bring it down, the pinks both down here a bit, to underneath this big lily pad section. Okay, and then let's get our last brush. One more brush, about the same size. And we're going to paint the purples at the bottom. I'm going to start with the light purples towards the top of the bottom area. Maybe adding a little bit in the pink. And then I'm going to go with the darker purple at the very bottom. So you've got the dark colors at the very top and the dark colors at the very bottom. Okay, and so you can incorporate some of the purple into the other pink parts of the painting. Maybe where the pinks and the blues combine a little bit. On some areas. Nice, that looks very lovely. Okay, so now we're going to go back into our blues and we're going to cover some of the lily pad areas. So let's take the blues and let's just make sure we get all of the pencil marks. We want to cover all the pencil. It's okay if it's nice and loose and not a straight line. That's good actually. We don't want it to be a straight line. We just want to cover the pencil. Now I'm taking the blue and I'm moving it to the pink so that there's no white in between on the edges. Fantastic. Now with the purple and pink, since these lily pads are closer to us, we can see in between some of the lily pads. So I want you to take your pink, the light, the dark, the purples, and I want you to just put little brush strokes throughout the lily pad, and also to cover the pencil marks with a nice thick application of paint. So you can see I'm just putting a couple of brush strokes of pink throughout the lily pads, breaking up that big shape a little bit. You can kind of do random, it doesn't really matter exactly where, as long as you've got the white shape just a little bit more covered with paint, just broken up a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to do that over here. I'm going to put the pinks on the bottom section of this group of lily pads. To break it up, then I'm actually going to go back to the blue on this one since it's half in the pink, half in the blue. And go back to the blue and break up the top half with the blue. Okay. Then go back to the pink. Great. Now this one down here, I'm going to use mostly purples to break it up. paint around those lily pads. Making sure I'm covering all the pencil marks. So, at this stage in the painting, all of the water should be covered, all of the pencil marks should be covered, and the lily pads that are towards the bottom of the painting should have a couple of brush strokes to break up their shape a little bit. So now I'm going, and I'm making sure I got all the water, because there's some parts of the water I didn't catch. So I'm going in with my pinks and my purples, making sure I get all of those. And I'm letting there be some variation in the color. I'm not doing an all purple section, all pink sections necessarily. I'm kind of going back and forth between the brush strokes so that we have a little bit of everything. Bring some of my light purple color up a little bit. Okay, that looks very pretty. I like the way that the water is looking right now. It's got a lot of variation in the colors. Okay, maybe just a little bit more purple over here. And some pinks. Okay. And if at any point you run out of paint while you're doing this process, just mix some more. Just put a little bit more paint on the palette and mix it up and get some more colors. And what's nice about this is you can have lots of different colors going on. You know, I think I might like it actually if I had maybe a little bit more dark blue at the top. So I'm going to go ahead, put some more paint on my canvas and make a slightly darker blue. Just for a couple of brush strokes towards the top and in the shadow area. So I'm just going to take a small amount of white and some more blues. And then with my brush that already has blue paint on it, I'm going to just layer a couple of dark blue brush strokes in. Anywhere where maybe I've got like a solid color going of one of the blues and I want to break it up a little bit, have something else there as well, make it more interesting. Or if the paint's a little thin in this specific spot, I can come in with this extra paint now that I have made and block that in. Add some shadow. If I add the dark blue right next to the pink, that'll create a little bit of contrast in the shadow and lighter areas. Okay. Looks good. All right, now let's move on to our lily pads. So let's take some of our Viridian green. Ooh, this one is an old one. Oh gosh. Okay, well, I've got enough green now. Let's see. Some of our permanent green. That's how much I was trying to get out. And maybe a little, I think that's enough for now. Maybe a little bit of yellow actually, in case we want to have some yellower pads. Okay. And I already used all the white, so I'm going to add 2 more big piles. Great. Okay, so if you have a palette knife and you've run out of space on your mixing board here, you can use the palette knife to clean it up. It's pretty nice. So I'm going to take this palette knife and I'm just going to put pressure on the edge and push the paint onto the knife. And then I can just set it aside, and then now it's a nice small compact pile. I'll do the same with the purples and the pinks. Now a little pile. There we go. So now we have some more space to mix. I think I'm going to use one of the palette knives that I put blue on to mix my greens. I'm going to take a little bit of the Viridian and add some white to that. So it's going to be a very blue-green, this one here, because it's just blue and Viridian. And then I'm going to take another pile of white and mix with just what is on my palette. So I didn't add any more color. And this is going to make a more pastel version of that green. Now I'm going to do it again, but this time I'm going to add a little bit of yellow. And so this green is going to have a warmer hue to it since it has more yellow in it. It's nice and light and pastel. And I'm going to actually make an even lighter version of this. So I'm going to take some more white. And without adding any color, just what's on my palette knife, mix it together. Now I want this one to be warmer, so I'm going to add a little bit more yellow. Great. Okay, so we've got 4 different greens. I think to this one I'm going to add some of the permanent green. Now we've got 4 very different greens, which is good. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to take a smaller brush now. I'm going to do a round brush. So let's do something like this. So it's pretty small, not the tiniest brush that you have, but it is round. And I'm going to start painting some of the lily pads. Okay, so for this part, I don't think it really matters too much, you know, what colors go where. It looks like they're all kind of the same and all throughout. My painting is going to be a little more vibrant than this image because I just like really bright colors. And I'm going to put a lot of paint on my brush. I'm going to glob it on there. And I'm going to just draw some horizontal lines. I'm just going to press down a little bit, and I'm just going to do horizontal lines to make little lily pads. And I'm not going to put them all together in one spot. I'm going to put some other colors in there as well, but I am going to give them little buddies. So you see, I'll paint one lily pad, and then I'll give it a little buddy right next to it. Maybe at a small diagonal, maybe a slightly different size. So I'm going to do a nice long one here, and then a little buddy right here, and we'll give him a little buddy. And so I'm just going to go around my canvas, and I'm going to put this green in a couple of different spots. Maybe some of them, their buddies will be attached, some of them will be further away. So I'm just doing horizontal brush strokes. I'm getting a lot of paint on my brush, and I'm just kind of squishing it to the side. Just pulling it in one direction. Getting them on the edges so that the paint is right up next to the blue. And it's okay if your colors mix a little bit, that's no problem. It'll give it variation. So for these lily pads that are closer to the bottom of the canvas, I want to make them a little bit more circular. So instead of just a line, I'm going to make more of an oval shape. And I'm working around the other pink color. So remember how we put some pink on the inside of our lily pad area? Now I'm putting my lily pads in between those pink spots that we created. Okay, and then these ones at the very bottom are the most circular, so like they're almost circles instead of a flattened oval shape. Okay, so I think that's enough of that color. Now I'm going to try, I think that this color that I made is a little bit too intense. I'm going to mix it together with this color. So it's got a, we'll have lily pads that are different, but more similar than if we were to use this color just straight as it is. So now I'm gonna do some lilies next to the ones I just painted, but now they have this color instead, and you can kind of tell that it's a new lily. And I want to use lots of paint. That texture is a really important part of the painting. It's okay if you don't fill in all the white areas. That is okay. We can come back in with the watercolor and put that in between those white areas as well. So it's a good thing I mixed those two colors together because they're pretty different, and we don't want there to be a huge difference in these colors. We just want subtle changes. Now if you want to, you can lay some green right on top of the pink. If you feel like the pink that you added or the blue in that section was a little too much and covered too much of the area, you can cover it with the green lily pad, no problem. Okay, so that's looking pretty nice. I'm liking the placement of the lily pads. I think I might add one or two here and there. I'm going to do a new color now. I'm going to work with this really, really light color here that I created. I'm going to add those to a couple of spots. Okay, so I'm just adding my lightest green to a couple of areas where I want some more lily pads. Trying to cover some of the white that I have left on the canvas. If you want to, you can put this lighter color on top of some of your darker ones, or the other colored ones, that's fine. Okay. When I look at the painting, I think I still want some more lily pads, and I want them to have the more bluish color. So I'm gonna try this light blue that I made, light blue green. Okay, I'm gonna add some over here. I'm gonna expand this lily pad in the front adding some extra guys off to the side. So it looks like a nice little clump of lily pads. I'm even adding some to these groups in the distance. Keeping that oval shape. Okay, so that looks great. I think that I have enough lilies, and now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back to those blues and pinks and purples that we used in the beginning, and I'm gonna fill in any gaps in between the lily pads that we still have. And I think I'm gonna use the darker versions of those colors so that the lily pads stand out and look like maybe they have a little shadow underneath them. So I'm gonna actually go and switch to a small brush for my shadows. I'm gonna take some of that blue that I had mixed up before. I'm just gonna go in and get in between those lilies and add those shadows. Just anywhere where there's some white canvas. Or if you put a lily pad that you didn't like, you made it too big, you can make the lily pad smaller too with this, by going back in with the background color. If you want to change the shape of the group of the lily pads a little bit, like maybe it's too straight of a line, you want to break it up, you can use this to do that. If you want there to be a little bit of water in between some of the lilies. If two of the lilies are too similar in color, you can just put some water right on top of one of them. Then now you've got a better, more noticeable shape. Okay. Still got some areas I want to cover. Okay, and now I'm going to do the same for the pink and the purple areas. I'm going to grab my slightly smaller brush so I can fit into those smaller areas. Okay, here we go. And I'm going to go for the purple because the purple's a little darker, like a shadow. I'm just going to put it in underneath some of those lilies that still have some white showing. Or fix the shape of some wonky looking lily pads. Break up that group right there. Maybe add a little purple in with the blue section up here. Okay, so I think I've covered all of the canvas. Maybe there's a little bit at the bottom I didn't cover. I'm going to make a little darker blue, or darker purple for that. And then I'll use some of this darker purple underneath these ones here as well. Now we're ready to paint some flowers. So let's get some more white. take a palette knife. To clean your palette knife, all you have to do is wipe it off on the rag. It's pretty simple. Take your white, take a section of the white and massage it so that it's a bit softer. Okay. Sometimes I like to use my palette knife as a palette, so I'm going to now take a very small brush, something about this big. I'm going to take my palette knife and I'm going to load the brush up with white. I want there to be a lot of white on there because I don't want to mix it with the paint that's wet on the canvas already. And if you only use a small amount of paint, it's going to mix together. But if you have a thick amount of paint on your brush, it's going to lay on top and it's not going to disturb the paint underneath. So I've got a lot of paint on this little tiny brush. I'm going to do a couple of lines down. So I'm going to pull it down like this and I'm going to get more paint. That's what's nice about using the palette knife as a palette. You don't have to keep going down all the way. When you're using a little brush, it's a lot more convenient. So basically, I'm creating a flower by making a V shape and then adding some petals in between. Okay? So when you use a lot of paint, it gets a little unruly. Sometimes you gotta push it around, but that's okay. Just kind of make a triangle facing down and add some petals in between. So there we go. We've got two little flowers. Now I'm gonna do a whole bunch of little flowers in the distance, and then the flowers that I make down here towards us are gonna be a bit bigger. So I'm gonna paint a V. I'm just lightly touching the surface of the canvas with the paint so that it stays. And then I'm adding a couple of petals. And if you want to make it a wider flower, you can add petals kind of on the outside of the V so that instead of being narrow like this, it's a little bit wider. So you start with 2 petals like this, then you put some in between, and if you want it to be wider, you can add petals on the outside. You can put them anywhere you want, just as long as it's on top of the lilies, or in between the lilies, within the lily area. We're starting with just white, but later we can add some pinks if we want. And have fun with kind of massaging the paint and giving it an interesting texture. Okay, so I did some small ones. I'm going to demonstrate a large lily flower now. So I'm going to go down here to these bigger ones, these bigger lily pads, and I'm going to drag my brush a little bit further so that the flower becomes bigger, like so. So instead of just touching the canvas, I'm going to drag it a little bit so that there's more area that the flower takes up. There we go, some nice lily flowers. Maybe I'll get one over here. So sometimes it looks good if you've got groups of things. So instead of just for spreading the out evenly, like one here, one here, one here, one here, I've got a little group of 3 and then I've got a single one over there. And these that are closer to the bottom here, I'm making most of them pretty big and wide because we can see them a lot better, or we want to be able to see them a lot better. Okay, great. And we'll do one more here. So there's kind of a group of flowers on this one side. All right, very nice. Okay, now the biggest flowers are going to be here in the very front. They're going to have the most detail, so I'm going to make them bigger than all the rest. All right, so I'm going to continue adding small lily flowers in these areas so that we've got quite a few. Okay, I think that's enough flowers. Now I'm going to add some pinks and blues to the flowers. So I'm just going to grab a little bit of that pink that we used before or mix some new pink. It's going to be mostly white again. I'm going to take this and I'm just going to add a little brush stroke of the pink into the flowers I've already created. Just a little color. Maybe there's a petal that's not so thick that you want to make thicker. I'll add that one as the pink. Okay, that looks super pretty. And now I'm going to add a very light blue to some of them. Not all, just a few of the brush or of the flowers. A very, very light blue. Just to give it a little shadow. And I added the pink brushstroke kind of on the left side of all of the flowers. So if I'm going to add a blue brushstroke, I'm going to put it on the right side. The opposite side of wherever the pink brushstroke is. Just as a little bit of shadow. I'm having my brush strokes come into the center so it looks like the flower is blooming. So this brush stroke is this way, this brush stroke is this way, they're all accumulating here at the center. So out, 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 like a fan shape. So when I'm adding my shadow and my pink color, I'm doing the same direction so that it looks like a flower. We can see more detail in these bigger ones. I might add a slightly darker pink just so that it stands out a little bit. Maybe I'll add a little bit of that dark pink to some of these here that are closer as well. And just a few in the distance so that we've got that pretty color. It takes a little bit of practice to get those brush strokes to look like petals, especially because you're using such thick amounts of paint, but by the time you're finished painting all the flowers, I'm sure you'll have it down. Okay. And actually, these ones here, I want to add a little bit more white to these big ones so that they stand out even more. So I'm going to get another brush that's clean, doesn't have any paint on it. A nice small one. I'm going to add some nice white petals onto these last ones. Okay, I think that looks nice. Maybe give them just a little pink as well. Okay, perfect. Now we're going to paint the shadows under the lily pads to give the piece just a little bit more dimension, because we've got a lot of light pastel colors going on here and we want to have some contrast. So now we're going to take our black, and we only need a little bit. And we're going to mix with our greens and our blues some of this black. So you can take your palette that has blue on it or a clean palette knife, and I'm going to take the blue that I have left over from the water and add a little black to it. And I'm going to take some of the green that I have left over from the lily pads and add that as well, so that we come up with like a greenish blue black, or greenish blue gray. Okay. That looks pretty good. I think I might want it to be a little bit darker than this. This is kind of light, so I'm gonna add more black to it so that it's got a little bit more contrast. Okay, so with this, we're also gonna use an extremely small brush. So go ahead and clean off one of your tiny brushes that you used for the flowers. And here we go. And I'm going to just take a little bit of paint. We're not going to glob it on this time. We don't want them to stand out too much. And we're basically just going to do a little line underneath a couple of the lily pads. We don't have to do all the lily pads, and you don't have to do the whole lily pad. Just a little shadow like that so that they stand out a little bit. So I'm not gonna do every single lily pad, and I'm not gonna cover the entire bottom of the lily pad. I'm just gonna go right under it and do just a little shadow. Maybe only on like, 60% of it. I'm starting, because I'm left-handed, it's easier for me to go from right to left. So I'm basically starting on the right side of the lily pad and just swooshing over, and then letting that color kind of disappear as the brush runs out of paint on it. Yeah, it looks nice. Okay. So I'm not going all the way around. I'm doing as thin of a line as I possibly can. These lily pads that are kind of stacked on top of the other ones, I might just do a little tiny shadow where they peek through. I'm not gonna put a line on top of another lily pad that's in front of it, because that lily pad is closer to us and thus is covering the shadow. So these ones that are up above, I'm just doing a little tiny line if they're touching the water. Okay, so you can see that pushes the lily pads a little bit off of the canvas. It makes them slightly more separate, and it looks like they're floating on top a little bit. So I'll show you down here on some of these as well. Okay. So I'm just dragging it across right underneath the lily pad. Just making a little shadow. I still had some blue on this palette, and that got into the shadow, and that looks pretty. I like that. Like I said, these ones up here, I'm not doing the whole lily pad. I'm just where it peaks in between the other ones. I might add a little shadow to give it some depth and definition. You don't have to do every single lily pad. Okay, and then if you want to, you can put a little shadow underneath some of the flowers. Maybe these ones that are at the bottom, that are closer up, to give them a little bit more depth. I wouldn't go overboard on the shadow on the flowers, maybe just like a little line right underneath one of the sides of the petals. And yeah. Or right underneath the flower. And there you are, you're finished. Now let's sign it. So I think I'm gonna sign the piece in this dark gray color. And there we have it, our finished piece. A beautiful impressionistic rendition of Claude Monet's Water Lilies. Congratulations for making it through, for trying something new, creating something beautiful. I'm really proud of you. I would love to see what you created. If you want to email me a photo of your painting, that would be amazing. I would love to see it. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you again on another painting lesson online.